Pues esperemos que ahora no esté la pantalla tapada como el episodio anterior. ¿Cómo le haremos? Ahí está mejor. Ahí está. Creo. Ya veremos. Esto es así, prueba y error. Ahí iremos encontrando qué nos gusta, qué no nos gusta. Pero muy buenas noches, persona que me ve. Espero que hayan tenido un muy buen día, un excelente día. Como lo ven, aquí donde estoy es de noche. No sé a qué horas estén viendo esto ustedes, pero espero que hayan tenido un buen día. Y si no, pues ni pedo. Así son las cosas. De igual manera te mando un besito en tu frente. Y sin más, aquí nos encontramos tarde pero sin sueño, subiendo un video o transmitiendo en vivo. Pero, pues bueno, vamos a empezar porque estoy cansado. Es tarde. Vamos saliendo de la chamba, pero vamos a leer. Ahí está. Chapter 6. Later on, Raskolnikov happened to find out why the huckster and his wife had invited Lisabetta. It was a very ordinary matter, and there was nothing exceptional about it. A family who had come to the town and been reduced to poverty were selling their household goods and clothes, all women's things. As the things would have fetched little in the market, they were looking for a dealer, and Lisabetta's business, she undertook such jobs and was frequently employed. As she was very honest and always fixed a fair price and stuck to it. She spoke, as a rule, little, and as we have already said, as we have said already, my bad. She was very submissive and timid, but Raskolnikov had become superstitious of late. The traces of superstition remained in him long after, and were almost ineradicable. ¿Cómo se dice en español? Ineradicable. Puta madre. I know this one. Inerradicables. How do you say in English though?
Ineradicable.
Ineradicable. And in all this, he was always afterwards disposed to see something strange and mysterious, as it were the presence of some peculiar influences and coincidences. In the previous winter, a student he knew called Pokorev, who had left for Kharkov. Sorry, that sentence was a little hard. In the previous winter, a student he knew called Pokorev, who had left for Kharkov, had chanced in conversation to give him the address of Alyona Ivanova, the old pawnbroker, in case he might want to pawn anything. For a long while he did not go to her, but he had lessons and managed to get along somehow. 6 weeks ago, he had remembered the address. He had 2 articles that could be pawned: his father's old silver watch and a little gold ring with 3 red stones, a present from his sister at parting. He decided to take the ring. He found the old woman he had. When he found the old woman, he had felt an let me gonna fucking try that. ¿Qué pedo con esas palabras, güey?
Insurmountable.
An insurmountable. Too great to be overcome. Insurmountable. He had felt an insurmountable repulsion for her at the first glance. Though he knew nothing special about her, he got 2 rubles from her and went into a miserable little tavern on his way home. He asked for tea, sat down, and sank into deep thought. A strange idea was pecking at his brain like a little chick in the egg, and very, very much absorbed him. Almost beside him, at the next table, there was sitting a student whom he did not know and had never seen, and with him a younger officer. They had played a game of billiards and began drinking tea. All at once, he heard the student mention to the officer the pawnbroker Alyona Ivanova, and gave him her address. This of itself seemed strange to Raskolnikov. He had just come for her, and here at once heard her name. Of course, it was a chance, but he could not shake off a very extraordinary impression. And here someone seemed to be speaking expressly for him. The student began telling his friend various details about Alyona Ivanova. She is first rate, he said. You can always get money from her. She is as rich as a Jew. She can give you 5,000 rubles at a time, and she is not above taking a pledge for a ruble. Lots of our fellows have had dealings with her, but she's an awful old harpy. What the fuck is a harpy? I know it's like a negative connotation, but I've never heard harpy before. I've heard hag, but oh shit. A rapacious monster described as having woman's head and the body of a bird's wings and claws, or depicted as a bird of prey with a woman's face. Damn. She got roasted. And he began describing how spiteful and uncertain she was. How if you were only a day late with your interest, the pledge was lost. How she gave a quarter of the value of an article and took 5 and even 7% a month on it, and so on. The student chattered on, saying that she had a sister, Lizaveta, whom the wretched little creature was continually beating, and kept in a complete bondage, little as a small child. Bondage like a small child. Though Lizaveta was at least 6 feet high, there is a phenomenon for you, cried the student, and he laughed. They began talking about Lizaveta. The student spoke about her with peculiar relish, and was continually laughing, and the officer listened with great interest, and asked him to send Lizaveta to do some mending for him. Raskolnikov did not miss a word, and learned everything about her. Lizaveta was younger than the old woman, and was her half-sister, being the child of a different mother. She was 35. She worked day and night for her sister, and besides doing the cooking and the washing, she did sewing, and worked as a charwoman and gave her sister all she earned. She did not dare to accept an order or job of any kind without her sister's permission. The old woman had already made her will, and Elisabetta knew of it. And by this will, she would not get a farthing. Nothing but the movables, chairs, and so on. All the money was left to a monastery in the province of N. The prayers might be said for her in perpetuity. Oh shit. Oh, in perpetuity, my dumbass. Sorry, I was skipping the page. Sorry. The prayers might be said for her in perpetuity. Elisabetta was a lower rank than her sister, unmarried, and awfully uncouth. Of a person appears behavior lacking good manners or farmyard grace.
Uncouth.
Awfully uncouth in appearance. Remarkably tall, with long feet that looked as if they were bent outwards. She always wore battered goatskin shoes, and she was clean in her person. What the student expressed most surprise and amusement about was the fact that Elisabetta was continually with child. Bro, this book is like not translated that well. I assume that it's translated because sometimes it just don't make sense to me. That's just me. I think you guys see it too. You guys think it's me, but it's the book. But anyways. But sorry. But you say she is hideous? Observed the officer. Yes, she is so dark-skinned and looks like a soldier dressed up. But you know, she is not at all hideous. She has such a good-natured face and eyes. Strikingly so. And the proof of it is that lots of people are attracted by her. She is such a soft, gentle creature, ready to put up with anything, always willing to do anything. And her smile is really sweet. You seem to find her attractive yourself, laughed the officer. From her queerness, no, I'll tell you what. I could kill that damned old woman and make off with her money. I assure you, without the faintest conscience prick. The student added with warmth. The officer laughed again while Raskolnikov shuddered. Shuddered. I think that's what it said. How strange it was. Listen, I want to ask you a serious question, the student said hotly. I was joking, of course, but look here. On one side, we have a stupid, senseless, worthless, spiteful, alien. 1 second, please. Ailing, poor health.
Ailing.
Okay. Ailing, horrid old woman. Not simply useless, but doing actual mischief. Who has not an idea what she's living for herself, and who will die in a day or two in any case. You understand? You understand? Yes, I understand, answered the officer, watching his excited companion attentively. Well, listen then. On the other side, fresh young lives thrown away for want of help, and by thousands on every side. 100,000 good deeds could be done and helped on that old woman's money, which will be buried in a monastery. Hundreds, thousands perhaps, might be set on the right path. Dozens of families saved from destitution, from ruin, from vice, from the log hospitals, and all with her money. Kill her, take her money, and with the help of it, devote oneself to the service of humanity and the good of all. What do you think? Would not one tiny crime be wiped out by thousands of good deeds? For one life, thousands would be saved from corruption and decay. One death, and 100 lives in exchange. It's simple arithmetic. Besides, what value has the life of that sickly, stupid, ill natured old woman in the balance of existence? No more than the life of a louse, of a black beetle. Less, in fact, because the old woman is doing harm. She's wearing out the lives of others. The other day, she bit Elizabeth's finger out of spite. It almost had to be amputated. Of course, she's not. Of course, she does not deserve to live, remarked the officer. But there is. But there it is. It's nature. Oh well, brother. But we have to correct and direct nature, and but for that, we should drown in the ocean of prejudice. But for that, there would never have been a single great man. They talk of duty, conscience. I don't want to say anything against the duty and conscience, but the point is, what do we mean by them? Stay, I have another question to ask you. Listen. No, you stay. I'll ask you a question. Listen. Well, you're talking and speechifying away. But tell me, would you kill the old woman yourself? Of course not. I was only arguing the justice of it. It's nothing to do with me. But I think if you would not do it yourself, there is no justice about it. Let us have another game. Raskolnikov was violently agitated. Of course, it was all ordinary youthful talk and thought, such as he had often heard before in different forms and on different themes. But why had he happened to hear such a discussion and such ideas at the very moment when his own brain was just conceiving the very same ideas? And why, just at the moment when he had brought away the embryo of his idea from the old woman, he had dropped at once upon a conversation about her? This conscience always seemed strange to him. This trivial talk in a tavern had an immense influence on him in his later action, as though there had really been in something preordained, some guiding hint. On returning from the Haymarket, he flung himself on the sofa and sat for a whole hour without stirring. Meanwhile, it got dark. He had no candle, and indeed, it did not occur to him to light up. He could never recollect whether he had been thinking about anything at the same time. At last, he was conscious of his former fever and shivering, and he had realized with relief that he could lie down on the sofa. Soon, heavy, leaden sleep came over him. What the fuck is a leaden?
Leaden.
Leaden, my bad. Dull, heavy, or slow. Okay. Leaden sleep came over him as they were crushing him. He slept an extraordinary long time without dreaming. Nastasia came into his room at 10 o'clock the next morning. He had he had no, it just says had difficulty in rousing him. She brought him in tea. He brought him in tea and bread. The tea was again the second brew, and again in her own teapot. My goodness, how he sleeps, she cried indignantly, and he is always asleep. He got up with an effort. His head ached. He stood up, took a turn in his garret, and sank back on the sofa again. Going to sleep again? Cried Natasha. Are you ill, huh? He made no reply. Do you want some tea? Afterwards, he said with an effort, closing his eyes again and turning to the wall. Nastasia stood over him. Perhaps he really is ill, she said. Turned and went out. She came in again at 2 o'clock with soup. He was lying as before. The tea stood untouched. Nastasia felt positively offended and began wrathfully rousing him. Why are you lying like a log? She shouted, looking at him with repulsion. He got up and sat down again, but said nothing and stared at the floor. Are you ill or not? Asked Natasha, and again received no answer. You'd better go out and get a breath of air, she said after a pause. Will you eat it or not? Afterwards, he said weakly. You can go, and he motioned her out. She remained a little longer, looked at him with compassion, and went out. A few minutes afterwards, he raised his eyes and looked for a long while at the tea and the soup. Then he took the bread and took up a spoon and began to eat. He ate a little, 3 or 4 spoonfuls, without appetite, as it were mechanically. His head ached less. After his meal, he stretched himself on the sofa again, but now he could not sleep. He lay without stirring, with his face in the pillow. He was haunted by daydreams, and such strange daydreams in one that kept recurring. He fancied that he was in Africa, in Egypt, in some sort of oasis. The caravan was resting. The camels were peacefully lying down. The palms stood all round in a complete circle. All the party were at dinner. But he was drinking water from the spring, which flowed gurgling close by. And it was so cool. It was wonderful. Wonderful. Blue, cold water running among the party-colored... Did I say party or pretty? I don't know. I'm assuming it's pretty, but hey. Pretty colored stones, and over the clean sand, which glistened here and there like gold. Suddenly, he heard a clock strike. He started, roused himself, raised his head, looked out the window, and seeing how late it was, suddenly jumped up, wide awake, as though someone had pulled him off the sofa. He crept on tiptoe to the door, steadily opened it, and began listening on the staircase. His heart beat terribly. But all was quiet on the stairs, as if one was asleep. It seemed to him strange and monstrous that he could have slept in such forgetfulness from the previous day and had done nothing, had prepared nothing yet, and meanwhile perhaps it had struck 6, and his drowsiness and stupefaction were followed by an extraordinary feverish as there were distracted haste, but the preparations to be made were few. He concentrated all his energies on the thinking of everything and forgetting nothing, and his heart kept beating and thumping so that he could hardly breathe. First, he had to make a noose. I don't know what a noose is. A loop with the running knot, tightening his rope wire. Oh,
Noose.
okay. Damn. First, he had to make a noose and sew it into his overcoat. A work of a moment. He rummaged under his pillow and picked out amongst the linen stuffed away under it a worn out, old unwashed shirt. From its rags he tore a long strip and a couple inches wide and about 16 inches long. He folded the strip in two, took off his wide, strong summer overcoat of some stout cotton material, his only outer garment, and began sewing the two ends of the rag on the inside, under the left armhole. His hands shook as he sewed, but he did it successfully, so that nothing showed on outside when he put the coat on again. The needle and thread he had got ready long before, and they lay on his table in a piece of paper. As for the noose, it was a very ingenious device of his own. The noose was intended for the axe. It was impossible for him to carry the axe through the street in his hands, and if hidden under his coat, he would still have had to support it with his hand, which would have been noticeable. Now he only had to put the head of the axe in the noose, and it would hang quietly under his arm on the inside. Putting his hand on his coat pocket, he could hold the end of the handle all the way, so that it did not swing. And as the coat was very full, a regular sack in fact, it could not have been seen from the outside that he was holding something with the hand that was in his pocket. This noose, too, he had designed in a fortnight before. Fortnight? My bad. When he had finished with this, he thrust his hand into a little opening between his sofa and the floor, fumbled in the left corner, and drew out the pledge, which he had got ready long before and hidden there. This pledge was, however, only a smoothly planned piece of wood, the size and thickness of a silver cigarette case. He picked up this piece of wood in one of his wanderings, in a courtyard where there was some sort of workshop. Afterwards, he had added to the wood a thin, smooth piece of iron, which he had also picked up at the same time in the street. Putting the iron, which was a little smaller, on the piece of wood, he fastened them very firmly, crossing and recrossing the thread round them. Then wrapped them carefully and daintily in a clean white paper and tied up the parcel so that it would be very difficult to untie it. This was in order to divert the attention of the old woman for a time, while she was trying to undo the knot and so gain a moment. The iron strip was added to give weight, so that the woman might not guess the first minute that the thing was made out of wood. All this had been stored by him beforehand under the sofa. He had only just got the pledge out when he heard someone suddenly about in the yard. It struck 6 long ago. Long ago, my God. He rushed to the door, listened, caught up his hat, and began to descend his 13 steps cautiously, noisily, like a cat. He had still the most important thing to do, to steal the axe from the kitchen. That the deed must be done with the axe, he decided long ago. He had also a pocket pruning knife, but he could not rely on the knife and still less on his own strength, and so resolved finally on the axe. We may note in passing one peculiarity in regard to the final resolution taken by him in the matter. They had one strange characteristic. The, the more final they were, the more hideous and more absurd at the once became in his eyes. In spite of agonizing inward, all the agonizing inward struggle, he never for a single instant all the time could believe in carrying out of his plans. And indeed, if it had ever happened that everything to the least point could have been considered and finally settled, and no uncertainty of any kind had remained, he would, it seems, have renounced it all as something absurd, monstrous, and impossible. I think I'm rushing, but I'm gonna wrap it up there. We'll find out later on if he's gonna do it or if he's not gonna do it. But if you want to know, you can just read it yourself. Just look it up. But